فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب.
الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So inshallah today we'll pick up where we left off in the last class. And just to start, there are a couple books that are explanations on the book that we're going over. And of the most famous explanations is Fath al-Qarib al-Mujib. And this is a very good explanation for this book. And it's, of course, this is in Arabic. And for a student who is a beginning student of knowledge, it's something that he can begin to understand. And it comes up and it fills up some of the things that maybe aren't completely understood in this book. And this is also one of the go-to books that I use to make sure that anything in my translation is like according to like the grammar and everything fits into the meaning that's in that book. And it's something that is very like a go-to book that is established within like the Shafi'i madhab, that this is a book that someone would read, and a lot of times they will study this book as an actual book that they study with a sheikh after they study this book. And so this is a book, inshallah. I'll put a picture of it for anyone who's interested in this book. There's also an explanation in English that's out there that is for this book as well. I haven't read that particular explanation, but it's out there and it's available for those who are interested in it. And I can put a link to that, inshallah. And so we stopped in this last book. We stopped where Abu Shujaa was talking about the different types of water, and he talks about the different types of water that are permissible to use to purify. And so he brought up 7 different categories, and I mentioned that that these 7 different categories, it either comes from the sky or it comes from the earth. And so we can see this with the rainwater, seawater, river water, well water, spring water, water from hail or snow, or water from glaciers. So all of this either comes from the earth or from the sky. And basically, in general, anything that is considered water, like plain water, that if you said water, it would be understood what you mean. Then this is something that can be used to purify. And so then we started up with the next of the 4 categories of water, and this is where we'll pick up today. So he basically says here that وَطَاهِرْ غَيْرُ مُطَهِّرْ. So that's where we left off in the last one. But just for a review, he gives 4 categories. In the first category, which is pure purifying water that's not disliked, and pure purifying water that's disliked. And we could put this in a single category and say that this is purifying water. And then the next category is pure water that can't purify, or unclean Najis water, which is something that has fallen into, something Najis has fallen into less than 195 liters approximately, or maybe like 200. That's why I said approximately. Or it is more than that, and its composition changed from something that is Najis that fell into it. And this is what we'll talk about. So this pure water that can't purify, or this Najis water, this is another category because it either can purify or can't purify. And so I'm gonna put just one here. If we make let's see here. So if we were to say that water is of 2 types, we would have if it can purify, or it's either pure or it can't purify. All right. 1 second, I'll see here if my screen will give me a screen here. Alright, so we have water, and it can either purify or it doesn't purify. Purifies or can't, or it can't purify. And then from these, we have from the ones that purify, we have the regular that it's not makruh. And so, like, no problem. It's not makruh. And this is normal. And then we also have one that is makruh. And this is what we talked about in the last one, which is mushammas. And so they say mushammas. And in Arabic it would be mushammas. And this is, I'll write it here, mushammas. And this is that water that's that hot water that's heated up in a metal basin that is in a hot country. It's heated up from the sun. So this is that one, it's like that one exception to the rule. And so this we said is just regular water. This is just regular water. It's H2O, you know, whatever you would say is just water. That's the one that we normally will use to purify. Is this like just regular water, what you open up on the tap for the most part? This is always going to be coming out regular water. The ones that can't purify, there's two types here. There's one that that can't purify because it is najis, and this is the last category he mentions. And this is, of course, it's we'll talk about when does water become najis, and then there's another category that is not najis, but it can't purify. So it's pure, but it can't purify. Pure. And so we'll talk about this category as he mentions here. And so these are, in general, these four categories. You have either it's not makruh, it purifies and it's not makruh, or you have makruh and it purifies. And this all comes under this one category, it purifies. And then you also have can't purify, it's either najis or it's pure. Alright, so we'll go back to the text of Abu Shujaa here. And so he says here, starting from the beginning of what he said, that he says that there's four types of water. And so ثم المياه على أربعة أقسام طاهر مطهر غير مكروه وهو ماء المطلق وهو الماء المطلق, which it means that this is the pure purifying water that's not disliked, and it's plain water. And so this word mutlaq, it means like whatever the word ma, or like water, would go onto, then this is what would be considered something that purifies. And then the next one that he says here is then there's and this is then the next one is tahir mutahhirun makruhun wa huwa al-ma'u mushammas. And so we talked about that last time, and that it's the pure purifying water that's disliked, mushammas, and the hot water heated from the sun in a molten metal basin in a hot land that could cause skin disease. So with all these conditions, of course, if something's going to cause you harm, that's just something that's disliked. And then the next one he says is طاهر غير مطهر وهو ماء المستعمل والمتغير بما خالطه من الطاهرات. And then he says here, and pure water that can't purify. And this is water already used to purify. It's called ماء المستعمل, which is water that's already used to purify. So if I made wudu, and that water that I used to wash my face for the first time, which this is the part that's obligatory for me to use, this water. And so when this water comes off of my face, from my beard, wherever it drips down, this water that's already been used to purify is something that the author here in the Shafi'i, the Madhab of Shafi'i, is that this water can't be reused again to purify another time, because it was used to lift. The state of impurity. Because it was used to lift the state of impurity, then it is now taken on another name, which is like it's used water. And because so it's not plain water anymore, but rather it's used water that is raised impurity. And so this is one of the views of the madhab that, like, theoretically speaking, this is something that is talked about, but like in reality, we're not going to use this water in the most part. Like this water that somebody would use, it's very little, to be honest. Like, because this would only be the water that someone has on their face. The first time that they wash their face, if they wash their face 3 times, the first time would be the water that comes off, and also the first time that comes off of their hands. That water when they wash their hands for the obligatory time, that first time which is obligatory, the water that comes off of that is if someone were to gather this water and then to make wudu again, the madhab of Shafi'i is that this would not be correct, and their wudu would not be sahih. Because this water has already been used, you can't reuse this water to raise that. The rest of the water, which comes from like the second and the third washing of the face, and the second and third washing of the limbs, and like the arms and the feet, this water it doesn't have this same characteristic. It could be used, but this is something, theoretically speaking, nobody really would do this. But it is something to, like, if someone has washed their face and then they go to wash their hand in the basin, if they put their hand in the basin, they should have the intention that they're bringing the water out, not that they're washing their hand in the basin. Because if they wash their hand in the basin, then the whole basin would become, in this case, it would become ma'u musta'mal, because they had their hand in it, and then they're washing their hand with it inside the basin, so they'd need to take it out and then wash their hand with it. This is the only thing that would be the difference. And of course, this is a view that the Shafi'i madhab holds, and none of the other madhabs, they agree with them in this particular issue. But it is it is something that you can keep in mind. But realistically speaking, when we use faucets and whatnot, this is not something we really have to worry about too much, because the faucet will always be coming with new water. And so then the next one that he says here, under the pure water that can't purify, is water or that has changed from pure things being mixed in it. So if I had a cup of water, and then I mix within this cup of water, I mix something such as, I mentioned before, like maybe tea leaves. I throw tea leaves in it. This is something that's pure, and it mixed with something that's pure. And now this water no longer has the name water. It has tea. It would be like something that's called tea. Or I have water that I mixed, maybe I mixed like sugar and some color to it, and then I made Kool-Aid. Like this is water that has something mixed into it. Or I have water that I put detergent into. Like this is something, the detergent is clean and is pure, and also the water is pure, and I mix these two things, and now this is something that it's been mixed with it in a way that it couldn't be separated one from the other. So in this case, we would say that because the water has been mixed with something else, it lost its name of water, and so that's what we were looking for, is something that has the name plain water to use. And so because that's not there, we no longer can use this water that has been mixed with other things. And also the same thing if someone uses rose water. Yes, we call it rose water, but like this water is not something that is pure water in its essence. It comes from something else, or it's mixed with something else in a way that, like, if you just said water, it wouldn't apply to this thing. And so, and the reason for this, of course, is when Allah mentions the person who's looking for tayammum and in the Quran, and He says, if وَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً, and if you don't find, and when you don't find ma'a, and so like Allah brings this word water in this certain form, ma'a, then this is something that only would refer to water. If you have like juice or something, this doesn't apply, because what you are looking for is water. And then that's the thing, we'll talk about tayammum in the future. But this is what we're looking for. Is we're looking for pure water that actually has the name water. And like all these things here that are under this third category, pure water that can't purify, which is the water already used to purify, or that's been changed from pure things being mixed in it, the name would have changed because of that. It's no longer, like, we wouldn't see it as water, like, as regular water, but rather this name is water mixed with something. And the next thing that he gives here is he says, and then he says, وَمَاءٌ نَجِسٌ. After he talks about وَالْمُتَغَيِّرْ بِمَا خَالَتُهُ مِنَ الطَّاهِرَاتِ, which is this is mixed with something else, of something that is pure. The next one he gives is the category of مَاءٌ نَجِسٌ, وَهُوَ الَّذِي حَلَّتْ فِيهِ نَجَاسَةٌ وَهُوَ دُونَ الْقُلَّتَيْنِ أَوْ كَانَ قُلَّتَيْنِ فَتَغَيَّرَ. And then he gives this next thing where he says, or unclean najis water. Like this is water that's unclean, or it's najis, which is water that something unclean, which is najis, has fallen into less than 195 liters approximately. And so this is so if I had like a bucket of water that's under like 200 liters, or like 100, maybe it's like 100 liters, or I have like a small bucket of water and whatnot, and then something najis falls into it, say like something, whether it's like something from a kid or something, or some type of a bit of urine falls into this water. Even if I don't smell it, or if I don't see exactly, like none of the like the water hasn't like changed the way it looks and whatnot, but there's something najis that has come into it. It now has made all of this water najis. And this is the view of the Shafi'i madhab, that this water, if najis has fallen into it, then it becomes najis. If it's something that is less than kullatain, is the term, which is 125 or 200 liters. Some people say 200 liters approximately. So it's like a small amount of water. If najis falls into it, then it becomes najis. And so this comes from the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, he was asked about water that was in like a place in the earth, and then there's things that fall into this water from like animals, and from like wild animals, and also from like some of the animals that are around them. And then he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, إذا كان الماء قلتين لم يحمل الخبث. And so like that this is that he says, if the water was kullatain, then it won't carry khabas, which is like which would be interpreted as najasa, or it won't carry this najasa. So basically, it was asked about this water, which would be like a well water or something, which some of the like scholars of hadith will talk about this hadith. So like this water that's out there in like this well or whatever, sometimes the rain, it would pick up the dirty stuff from what's around, and it would wash into this thing. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he gives the reason, which is if the water was kullatain, which is like two, which is the amount, which is known as like two, like a kulla is like when some person is like a big strong man, the most that he can carry would be like a kulla. And then kullatain, which is two of these, if the water was more than this, then it won't carry that najasa. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ, he says here, that if it's more than that, then it won't carry the najasa. And so the Shafi'i madhab, they looked at this, and also the Hanbali madhab, they looked at this hadith, and they said, if the Prophet ﷺ said, if it's kullatain, then it won't become najis, then what we would understand, if it wasn't kullatain, then it would carry najis. And so this is the way the Shafi'i madhab, they look at this, is they understand from what's understood from this hadith, is if it was less than kullatain, then we would understand that it carries najis. And the madhab of the Maliki is they look at another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said that al-ma'u tahurun la yunajjisuhu shay'. And so like the Prophet ﷺ, he said that water is something that is purifying, and nothing makes it najis. And they look at this hadith, and it's a very general hadith, and they take with this general hadith, and they don't take with what is understood from this other hadith, because it's not necessarily something that is stated from the Prophet ﷺ, but rather it's an understanding that's taken from flipping what he said inside and out. It's like flipping what he said inside and out. If he said, if it was this way, then it won't carry this. And so the ruling was taken from, if it wasn't this way, then we would give it the opposite ruling, which it carries najis. But the other thing that the Prophet ﷺ said was al-ma'u tahurun la yunajjisuhu shay', that the water is pure, and nothing will make it najis. And of course, like this is understood as long as it doesn't change its smell, or with something najis, or something, or it doesn't change its taste, or like some of the color of it. If it changes these things, then it would be najis with like by consensus, and because of course we would know that this became najis. But this is something the Malikis, they take this view, and this is the view that many of the Shafi'iyah, they took this view for themselves. Of course, this is not the madhab of Shafi'i, but this is the madhab of Imam Malik, and it has a lot of strong, like the evidence is strong when it comes to looking at this hadith, because the Prophet ﷺ, he said this, and what he said shouldn't be, we wouldn't make what he said more specific from something that could be understood from what he said in another place, when it's not exactly what he said. This is something that you would look at in usul fiqh, but in general, if you want to go on the safe side and take the what the author here he says, so if something najis has fallen into water, then you would change this water and you wouldn't use it even if there was no difference in the water from what you can see, smell, or taste. So this is something that would become najis. And another, or it's more than that. So even if it's more, he says here, or it's more than that, which is more than kullatain, which is the 195 liters. And then it's changed, its composition has changed from this. And this is with ijma'. This is with consensus. So if the water is more than this, like around this 200, and then it changed its composition, then this is something that it would now be najis, and this is something you absolutely, of course, you can't raise your you can't use water that's najis to raise impurity. Like this doesn't work. And so these two types, if I go back to the to what I said here, so we had the water here that is of a couple different types. We have the water that is purifying, and it's not makruh, which is regular water, and we have the makruh water, and that's mushammas. That's that hot water in the sun that was baking in the sun in a metal basin in a hot country. With all of these conditions, then it comes under that. And then can't purify. And then we have the najis water, and this is what we talked about right now. And of course, this won't. And then this is the water that has come under 100, like let's say 200, 200 liters, 200 liters or less, and that najis has fallen into it. Fell into. All right. And then the next one is the pure, and this is something that, such as this is the musta'mal. We talked about musta'mal used, and then we also have the other category, which is mixed. It's mixed with other things in a way that it wouldn't separate from it. If someone in just another thing, like if someone was in like in a trail, they're going like hiking in the woods and whatnot, and they find water that has leaves in it. These leaves that are mixed in it, this is something that is not something that would take it away from being considered water, and so it'd still be something that you could use to make wudu with. As well as if it's something that, say you have a water that if it was shaken up, there would be like dirt in the water, and this when it's left for a while, the dirt would settle to the bottom and it's separated and the water is still water. This is something, of course, like even though it was mixed, and when it gets separated, this is something you can use, and there's no problem with that to do, because that mixing is not a permanent mixing; it's a temporary mixing. And so that's something that's to be remembered. Also, the next thing, and the next chapter that we'll go into is a chapter that regards what someone wears, because of course all of this chapter is about getting ready for salah and making sure that our body and our clothes, as well as where he's coming here, is something that's pure. And so here he gives. The next chapter is talking about tanning animal skins, and in general, animals are of two different types when they're killed. They're either killed Islamically, slaughtered in an Islamic fashion for eating, and in this case, this animal is pure, and its skin is pure as it is. Like this animal is pure, and the skin is pure. The only thing that's not pure is the blood that squirts out from the animal. This is the only thing that's impure. But everything of the animal, if it's slaughtered Islamically, then it's something that's pure. But if it's not slaughtered Islamically, then it would be considered meta. And so if it's meta, then this animal that is meta, then this is something that it is najis, and all of its stuff is najis. Everything that has to do with this animal and all of its body parts, the blood, the fur of it, the skin of it, all of this is najis, because it's something that is impermissible for us to eat. And if it's impermissible for us to eat, the understanding that's given from it is that it is also unclean, and so we wouldn't use it, because Allah says hurimat alaykumul mayta. And so this is something that is made haram for us, to of course to eat it is something that is haram. And so when it comes to the tanning, this is something that if it's if it's haram for us to eat it, then someone, maybe they understand that this is something that, like, if you were to take the dead animal skin, then you can't use it because it's meta. And this comes in a hadith that that someone was given, like some of the Sahabis were given they were given like a sheep that died by itself. It wasn't slaughtered Islamically, but rather it died by itself. And this would be considered also, it would be considered meta, because it didn't die from an Islamic slaughtering, but rather it died from maybe sickness, or fell and got beaten on the head or something, or had an accident and then died. However it was, this is something that, unless it's slaughtered Islamically, then in general is something that is unclean. And for it to be cleaned, it needs to be tanned. And the Prophet ﷺ was asked, why don't you use its skin? And they said it's meta. It's something that is meta, and so they understood that this was something we can't use. And the Prophet ﷺ said that any skin that has been tanned, then it has become tahir. Then it's become tahir. And this is something that we take from this hadith, that any skin, if it's been tanned, which means like all of its guts and whatnot have been removed from it, it's been cleaned from in such a way that if you put water on it and then and took off the water, that it wouldn't disintegrate or mold and go away and ruin and get ruined real quick. This is something that if it's been tanned, then this is pure, regardless of whether it's meta, slaughtered Islamically. All of this is something that it would be pure. So if we get leather shoes or something, or a leather belt, this is something, as long as we'll talk about this here, but as long as it's been tanned and it's not from the two animals that we mentioned here, then this is something that is pure in general. So the author here, he starts off here, and he says وَجُلُودُ الْمَيْتَةِ تَطْهُرُ بِالدِّبَاغِ. And so he says that the different types, the skin of meta is تَطْهُرُ بِالدِّبَاغ. And so all dead animal skins can be purified with the tanning process. And then he makes an exception here. He says إِلَّا جِلْدَ الْكَلْبِ وَالْخِنْزِيرِ وَمَا تُوَلَدَ مِنْهُمَا أَوْ مِنْ أَحَدِهِمَا. And so then he says, except for dog or pig skins, or whatever's bred from them. And so what he says is مَا تُوَلَدَ مِنْهُمَا, if something was bred from both of them, or from one of them, such as you had a wolf, let's say a wolf mated with a dog, and then you have a dog wolf that comes out. This is from one of them. So this would also have the same. It would take the ruling of the dog. The dog's skin. Of course, this is if the dog, the one that gave birth to it, was a female dog. And so so he gives this exception here, and the reason for this is, in general, there's the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, he talks about طهور إناء أحدكم إذا ولغ فيها الكلب, that the cleaning of this, or tahur, which is the purity for someone's dish, if a dog has licked in it or drank from it inside of it, is for it to be washed 7 times. One of the times with turab, which is dirt. And so one of these times would need to be washed with dirt. And we'll talk about this in the future. But what we get from this is that the dog has made this thing impure, and has made this dish impure just by licking it or drinking from it. This dish has become impure in such a way that it needs to be washed 7 times, which is more than any of the other things that have come to us in the Sharia. It needs to be washed 7 times, and one of the times with dirt. And so because of this, the Shafi'i, they take that if the dog from its tongue or from its saliva is something that normally would, their reasoning is that the dog is constantly panting, and his saliva is probably the cleanest part of his body. And so if this came into the water and destroyed it, then the rest of his body is even more deserving of that, something that creates something najis. and so, or that the rest of him is najis as well. It's something that is impure. And this is the view of the Shafi'i madhab, as well as most of the other madhabs are of the opinion that the dog is something that in general is najis, and there's certain relaxations that are made for like a guard dog that's outside of the house. This is something that's permissible to use because there's an actual use and need for it outside the house, as long as the person is careful that they don't get any of the najis from the dog, such as his saliva or like his hair and whatnot, on his garment that he's praying with and whatnot. And then he's careful not to get any other parts of the najasa onto things that are going to invalidate his prayer. And then and also like a dog for like hunting. These are the exceptions that are made in the Sharia for like having a dog. But for a dog to be inside as a pet, this is something that the Prophet ﷺ said, if someone takes a dog inside their house as a pet, then they will have 2 qirat. And qirat is usually understood as like, this is a huge amount of reward that's deducted from their good deeds every single day. That they have this dog that they've taken without one of these 2 other reasons that are previously mentioned. So because of this, this is something that dogs, they're permissible in certain cases, but in most cases they're not permissible to have as a pet. And this is of course in opposition to most of the society in America and whatnot. But this is what the Prophet ﷺ has given us for guidance. Of course, this is something. Some of it maybe we understand the wisdom behind it, and some of it maybe we don't. But we should trust Allah and trust His Messenger. And if we're not having a dog for one of these 2 reasons, whether it's for hunting or for guarding, and it's kept outside, then this is something that should be avoided. And also the dog should never, even if it is for a guarding purpose, it should not be put inside the house, because also from another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that the angels don't enter the house, and like these are the angels of barakah, like they don't enter the house of someone if there's a dog inside of it. And so, of course, this is something that if you have this this thing that's associated with this negative thing, then this is something that should not be done. And most of the scholars have talked about that this is something that's impermissible. And so, so he says here that all dead animal skins can be purified except for the dog. So because the dog has these characteristics that he's najis, is what the Shafi'i opinion is, that he's najis. Then this is something that if the dog was najis in his lifetime, then he doesn't become najis after death, because while something is alive, this is like the best of his time. And then if he dies, then he's even more deserving to stay as he was, and like for the things that are alive, all other animals in general are pure while they're alive, and it's when they die that it would take another thing if they weren't slaughtered Islamically. And then he says also, or whatever, also pig skin. He brings pig skin in here. And this is something that, in general, pigs are something that it's impermissible for us to eat them. And so this is something that, since it's impermissible for us to eat pig skins, then the Shafi'i, they look at pig as also najis as well, because a dog, in most of its lifetime, you can use it for a couple things, like for guarding or for hunting and whatnot, and there's relaxation for it. But a pig, there's no use for it whatsoever, and we shouldn't be eating it. There's no use for it whatsoever, so it's in a worse state than the dog. And so their reasoning is that it's worse than the dog, so we also say it's najis. And Imam An-Nawawi, he says that this like the view of the madhab is something that there's no really strong dalil or like evidence for saying that pigs in and of themselves are najis, but rather we know that we can't eat them and that we can't use them or take them into possession and whatnot. And so this is so to say that it is najis, it needs some evidence from that. And this is the evidence is weak with the Shafi'is in this particular thing. But at the same time, someone should avoid, like if they have any pig skin stuff, this is something they should avoid ever praying inside of that, at least to make sure that they come out of the difference of opinion, and they go into a place where nobody is saying that their salat is invalid. And so if their skin is any of these dead animal skins, if it is tanned, then it becomes pure. And then also he gives another thing here, and he says وَعَظْمُ الْمَيْتَةِ وَشَعْرُهَا نَجِسٌ إِلَّا الْآدَمِ. And then he also says that the bones, here, he says that the bones from and hair from dead animals are unclean, but not from humans. And he mentions this, and this is the view of the Shafi'i madhab, that bones are not, like if the bone is of something that's meta, then it doesn't become pure when you like do the tanning process, because of course the bones is a different state than the tanning process. So bones in general are something that can't be purified from the state, because it died in this sense, and it was najis, so it doesn't become a najis. And then the other thing is, like, then he mentions here as well as the hair. And the view is that the hair used to have life inside of the hair, and then it died. And so this hair is something that is also najis. And this hair, even when someone would tan something, the hair doesn't get tanned. It doesn't go through a tanning process. The hair itself, like the little hairs, they don't get the tanning process, so they don't get that change of a ruling from being najis to something that's not najis. And this is the view of the Shafi'i madhab, that hair and bones, they don't become this way. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentions that like the hair and also like bones and whatnot, these have a life that is more similar to like a plant. And so they should like, because they grow by themselves even after the animal has died. You can see that, like, if an animal died, their hair will continue to grow. Or like even a person, if you see that they died and they were clean shaven when they died, after a few days they have like hair that came out. Like, where'd this hair come from? Was it from their life, or is it something that grows by itself? And also the same thing with like fingernails and whatnot. And so this is something that is more like, the life is more associated with like this type of life is more associated with the plant. So it's not something that's najis, according to the view of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. And this is a view that if someone followed it, has strong evidence. And so he makes this exception, but the view of the Shafi'i madhab is that the hair is something that doesn't get purified. So if you bought a fur jacket, like you bought a fur coat from one of these places that was like real fur and whatnot, then this fur would be najis, and it would never be able to be un-najis. So this is something that would be impermissible, according to the view of the Shafi'i madhab, to wear this, and of course to pray in this. This is something that would render someone's prayer invalid, unless this was like an animal that was slaughtered Islamically. Then in this case, then everything would be pure from it, including its fur. And then he says, but not from humans. And this was the exception he gives. And this is because humans in general, they're never najis. And of course, we're never going to wear like human skin or anything of that sort. That's something that we wouldn't do. But he mentions it here just so someone would know that these things are not najis in and of themselves. Like the hair of a human after he passed away, if someone has a lock of them, then this isn't something that in and of itself is najis. And so the next thing that he gives, which is a small chapter, is that he talks about that he says, وَلَا يَجُوزُ إِسْتِعْمَالُ الْأَوَانِي الذَّهَبِ وَالْفِضَّةِ وَيَجُوزُ إِسْتِعْمَالُ غَيْرِهِمَا مِنَ الْأَوَانِي. And he says that it's not permissible, when he's talking about what vessels are okay and not okay to use, he says it's not permissible to use gold or silver vessels. Other than that is fine, and other than that is fine. And so this comes from a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, when asked about their gold, the Prophet ﷺ, he says in a hadith, he said, لا تلبسوا الحرير ولا ديباج ولا تشربوا في آنية الذهب والفضة ولا تأكلوا في صحافها فإنها لهم في الدنيا ولنا في الآخرة. So he says, and this is in regards to these different things, he says, لا تلبسوا الحرير, don't wear silk. And this is like for the men, and like the women are allowed to wear silk, and that comes in other evidences as well. Wala dibaj, which is another type of thick silk that is not permissible to wear. And also he says, wala tashrabu fi aniyati dhahabi wal fidda, and he says, don't drink from the vessels of gold and silver, and don't eat from that as well. وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِنْ سِحَافِهَا, and don't eat from the platters of this as well. فَإِنَّهَا لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا, and because this is for them in this dunya, like in this worldly life, وَلَنَا فِي الْآخِرَةِ, and is for us in the akhirah. And this is something in the akhirah Allah mentions these things, and this is something that the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions here, that this is something we'll eat from these different platter, or like this, like the different ania, which is like the different vessels and whatnot, will be gold and silver in the akhirah. And this is something that's for the believers, and for the disbelievers, they eat it in this life, and this is something they get their, this is their, like the dunya is their Jannah, and then they have the fire, the hellfire in the afterlife. But for us and the believers, we obey Allah in these things, and this is something that we don't eat or drink from these. And also, as well as eating and drinking, these are things that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, but the general meaning from it is using. So we don't use this, and this is what the author, he says, that it's not permissible to use gold or silver vessels. And since we see that eating and drinking, which there's like, there's a reason that we would use it to eat and drink from, we don't, since it's not permissible to eat or drink from it, we wouldn't use it as well. And he brings us in tahara, because maybe someone would have a gold or silver dish that they would use to make wudu from. And this is something that he says here is not permissible to use. It's not permissible to use gold or silver vessels, and other than that is fine. And so sometimes there are like silverware, we say silverware, and this is because like way back in the day, people would actually have silverware. This is something that's impermissible for someone to use to eat. If it is something that has just like a little bit of, like it has a little bit of coating of gold or something on the outside, if it's just like a gold coating and it's not something that actually has any weight to it, like if you put it to fire, you put the gold to fire, expose it to that. If no gold actually would fall down into your hand, like it was actually a substantial amount, then this is something that's permissible, because it doesn't necessarily fall into this prohibition, because you wouldn't say that this is gold, but rather it's something that has a little bit of gold coloring on it. And so this is the chapter that he talks about what is permissible from this. And he says, other than that, other than gold and silver, even if it was something that was like a fancy something or another, from another fancy metal, or from or like some type of very expensive vessel, like this is something that's permissible. Of course, no one should be wasting their money, but in general, these things are permissible to use, as long as it's not gold and silver, because this is something that the Prophet ﷺ has prohibited with that. And like the reason it's prohibited, there's two different like idla, which is the meaning from it. One is because gold and silver is something that it is money in and of itself. So to put money in something that you're using day in and day out, this is something that is a waste of money. Like you're wasting your money. You're putting actual money, which for how many thousands of years we use gold and silver as our actual currency. So to put this in the form of like a cup or a basin or something, this is something, and then to eat from this is something that is like extravagance, and there's no need for it. And also the other reason is the poor people that see this, their hearts will be affected by this person that is just using money as to eat from. Like he's using money to eat with. Of course, if somebody's like picking a $100 bill and they're just using it to like tie things up with it, of course, like this is something. Why would you use your money in this sense? This is something that's valuable. And so these are the two reasons that are mentioned. One, it's because it's money in and of itself, and two is because this is something that when a poor person sees the money just being used in this manner, this is something that would be something that would break their heart. To see that this person is just so rich, and he just uses his money to eat with. He eats with his money. And of course this is something that we should never be using these gold and silver in a way that like hurts other people's feelings or whatnot, or like is showing off in a way of like how wealthy someone is. Of course, if someone's wealthy, they can wear nice clothes, and there's no problem with that. But of course, like eating with money in and of itself, or like pouring water and drinking from your money, like this is a whole other thing. And Allah knows best. Inshallah, we'll stop here. I know we went like the time was a little over today because it was starting late, but I think we'll start after Maghrib in the future. والله تعالى أعلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب وأمرت لأعدل بينكم الله ربنا وربكم لنا أعمالنا ولكم أعمالكم لا حجة بيننا وبينكم الله يجمع بيننا وإليه المصير